All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, obviously today, big day, final models due. However, just for the record, guys, I know some of us haven't even taken Studio yet, are still a little bit behind within the exercises, and that's fine. If you turn it in today, it's definitely 10 points extra credit to the entire whole, and yes, thank you for getting to the final model. However, also this leaves some more time. So I want to express that if you're not happy with the results, try again, right? Try a different way. Obviously, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, right? However, we do have to move on, and I do want to get to more of the thick of it of something that, of course, applies to Studio, which is definitely the drawings, right? So we're going to talk about a plethora of drawings. We're going to also show how, well, if you notice in Graphics 1 and Graphics 2, we actually draw a plan, we draw a section, we draw an elevation, and we put those together to essentially make a model, right? Some sort of three-dimensional view, or by golly, we even plot out the shade and shadow of every component, right? However, in the digital realm, we actually do the reverse. We make the model, and then we actually produce the drawings from that model. However, it's not a magic button. No, there's not an AI button that's just going to magically make it for you. And arguably, I've tried to throw it into a large language model, and it just sucks, right? It turns windows into things that aren't windows, and vice versa. So it's still preliminary. However, the way that we do it, at least today, we call it post-production, which basically just means post-producing what we have actually made in a model, and of course turning that into a line drawing. Now, as you can imagine, we could just make 2D most situations. Like, so for instance, if I get this going, we can take the entire thing and make 2D. And relatively speaking, yeah, that definitely works. We definitely have some skills with that now. But as you can see, it takes a bit of time. And maybe I shouldn't have done this for the tutorial. But as that's going in the background, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual assignment. So exercise 6 is the final exercise. However, a little bit later I'll go over the final requirements. As we wrap up our study models, it is best not to get lost in the madness of a digital file our design process can lead to. For our next exercise, you are assigned with taking your digital models and transcribing it as we have done before with previous assignments. In our next tutorials, we will also be adding Adobe Photoshop to the workflow and add a touch of context for the project to fit in just as a studio project would require. However, in this exercise, you have creative freedom and is always encouraged when exploring the model. However, you'll notice that our final drawings include floor plans, which is basically a base floor plan, some sort of middle cut, and then possibly that top deck, or what's also known as a roof plan. At least one section, however, open to having two sections, basically long and short, and you'll see how easy it is. It sounds like a lot right now, but actually it is fairly easy to lay them all out in Rhino first. We need some process diagrams. For the most part, we probably actually already have this. So your exercise 3 probably already have like a three-dimensional view, the basic point line plane diagram that basically made this model in the first place. So some of this stuff you probably already have. And of course something that we'll actually cover a little bit today, which is one exploded axonometric drawing, and of course on 11:17. Bonus, we're going to go with a 2-point perspective. It could be one, it could be two perspectives. Keep in mind, if you've already taken D3 and D4, I'm kind of expecting that. But if you haven't even taken D1 or are still in D1, it's a bonus, to say the very least. Obviously graded for its craft and accuracy, line weight, and of course the creative efforts. But as you can see from the schedule, essentially today, of course introducing exercise 6, we really only have about 6 class periods left. So running pretty short, and I will say we'll continue this of course with a part 2, a part 3, and those are subject to change as well. But as you can see, we have a lot of work in class to do. With our final pinup, that's right, you don't have a final test in this class, right? I do extend basically this project to kind of a final PDF requirement, and again, I'll go over that not necessarily today, but in obviously the final video. Today I really want to focus on planning out some of these drawings and showing you some of the best tools and techniques that we can have in order to produce this, and starting to with the workflow. That way we can get to a nice continuation and maybe dive into a little bit of Photoshop today, but mostly setting up the page and getting it ready in terms of workflow. So it looks like that was produced, and as you can see, it's a game changer, right, compared to analog drafting. My goodness, how long that would actually take us. But it can simply produce just about any model. So I have my previous finished model, air quotes for that one, and I still want to actually refine it. So in my case, I ended up grouping those last time, so I can definitely ungroup them. However, a couple of things that I'd probably want to produce first is a couple of 11 by 17s to scale. So just to recover, it does say 1/4 scale. So that is something that I'd want to produce probably from the get-go, such as the floor plans at 1/4 scale and the sections at 1/4 scale. And I definitely want to start to see how that fits on the page. So it makes a lot of sense to make an 11 by 17. I'll use my calculator, and of course I've done this in previous videos, but it doesn't hurt to of course do it again. So I'm going to set up my page. So 11 by 17, 11 times 4 is 44 feet. By 17 times 4, which is, anybody know? Is it 192? Let's see. 17 times 4, nah, it's not 192, 68. So we'll go with 68. And what this represents now is an 11 by 17 at that 1/4 scale. So I know I need a couple of those, of course 3 for my floor plans. So probably 3 floor plans and probably 2 sections. So again, I can't express this enough. It pays to be organized, right? Especially in Studio. You could even get the text involved, but I won't necessarily do that for today. We'll just call this one, just so you kind of get the idea. But easily you could do first floor, second floor, third floor, and technically you could just do this all in one spot and then even copy it for each drawing. Again, can't express this enough. We always do the drawing, the layering, the fixing, the make 2D'ing, all in Rhino, right? I don't want to see you drawing in Illustrator. I don't want to see you drawing in Photoshop. You'll be there for days and it'll be inaccurate once you finish anyway. So let's get some of these drawings. One of the first tools that we can do, and I may have shown this before, but is a clipping plane. So I'll type in clipping plane. Fantastic tool where I basically just express the plane of existence that I'd like it to be. And as you can see, it's pretty much like a section cut, right, that you would normally put on a piece. And as we move it along, we'll see that we can increase and we can now actually make 2D some of these situations. So right off the bat, and especially this goes to some of us who maybe have never taken a graphics course, we have, of course, the cut itself. This is our floor plan, right? And you can see that it cuts through various elements and we can move it accordingly, right? Now, relatively speaking, each floor is usually about 5 feet, or at least to the first landing of some kind. In my case, that's a pretty scarce first floor plan. I think it would actually be okay, but I could add a little bit more information. So for instance, I'm going to use Gumball and of course move that a little bit better and accordingly. In my case, maybe I go up to that piece. However, I'm already getting kind of stuff in the way, so I might want to get away from that. Essentially what happens right here is what's known as a break line. So I'll show you what that translates to in terms of graphic standards. However, one of the first things to know about clipping plane is that, well, it doesn't automatically show up in every single viewport. You'll have to click on the clipping plane object itself. You'll have to go to properties and of course enable that in the other views, and you'll immediately see those things happen. Now for the sake of argument today, let's just go ahead and make our floor plans. So I'll take the piece without the clipping plane and make 2D. I'll make sure that's in actually a top view. In my case, maintaining source layers, that really starts to come into play, right? I mean, all of that organization, I no longer have to keep doing that again, but I couldn't express enough that if you haven't organized it already, You probably should before this step, otherwise you're going to organize these individual lines rather than letting it just produce an organized system for you. In my case, it's looking pretty good. I probably don't want hidden lines. Very often in floor plans, we don't show hidden lines besides something that is maybe above us. In our case, in this project, I think we can omit that just because we have everything above us. So we'll play it by ear. We'll press apply, and of course allow it to produce a Make 2D. As you can see, it's not all going to fit on the page because of that scaling issue. So, I'd probably want to fine tune it. And as you can see, it didn't quite get everything. It didn't get the stairs, it didn't get some of those pieces, and they could be locked or grouped. So be careful. If something is grouped like it is, you need to ungroup it first, otherwise it won't actually produce a Make 2D. So in my case, kind of useless there. I'm going to get rid of that one for today and try again. We'll take this piece, all of it, Make 2D, and try again. Much better. Of course, in this case, we actually have all the stairs and all the components that we actually need. In my case, I can also still rotate it. So if I wanted to declare that that was actually the front, let's do it. But what's really nice about this is now that it's on the paper, it's already scaled. And of course, as you can imagine, before I go to anything, I'd want to trim these out. Basically centering it to the page and trimming whatever doesn't fit. In my case, I'm kind of a fan of breaking those boundaries as well. You'll see that things are still grouped, so just like any other Make 2D, we have to ungroup it as well. Once we've ungrouped it, of course, we could actually get rid of things that appear like lines. Not a big deal. And I'm not a huge fan of boundaries, so something like that would definitely be, oh, come on, mouse. There we go. Would definitely look pretty nice and possibly just about where we want to be before we get started. However, I do this several times. Obviously, I'd get my middle view or my middle floor. So I'd just raise this up. And even to a certain degree, say I was in studio and I needed it exactly 10 feet, I could move this, of course, 10 feet. So move. In my case, 10 feet. Hold shift and of course get that perfectly. Now, I probably don't need exactly 10 feet today, but as you can see, I can get to the next platform and show that view. I probably want to show a little bit more, just because, well, I don't have a lot going on in my model. After all, it is the tutorial model. But something about there. Very often, we'd actually place it about 5 foot above the floor that we actually want to show. That way, we could potentially show the cut windows or cut wire cut. Maybe you actually even have some thresholds that you want to show as well, such as the one that I should be showing right here that is clearly blocking my view. Again, for the sake of tutorial. Now in your case, you don't necessarily have to model it. To be fair, once you make 2D, you could just poche it differently, and I'll basically go over that when I make this view. So let's make the second view. Boom. Take the whole piece, make 2D. Sweet. Maintain object source layers. We'll let it produce. I'll rotate it 90 degrees like I did the other one, and basically put my next view. Now, obviously some of these pages are a little too close to each other, so I'm going to do my best to basically just move this out of the way. Not too shabby. But they don't necessarily need to be close. We'll take that piece, kind of want to line it up to the midpoint. That way I know that it's center on page. And of course aligns with this other one. Can't express that enough, especially in studio. And I could definitely draw a line and make that a line. Sweet. Oh, of course you gotta draw a straight line. Hopefully you guys sometimes just kind of skip the boring parts, but again, I gotta make it for everybody, and not everybody knows what to do, so. Of course, in my case, I want to trim this off, but I can't because, well, it's grouped. So of course, ungroup, and you should be good. Trim. In my case, this sliver of a piece. Sliver. And a couple more. As you can see, it takes a lot of fine tuning, even after making 2D. but arguably very forgiving compared to the drafting table. I can simply delete, edit, undo, but essentially looking at it at a bird's eye view or a plan view. Of course, being in that top dimension. And deleting everything unnecessary or really outside of the paper. Eventually this will translate to going into Illustrator, from Illustrator going into Photoshop. And it essentially will be like a coloring book. That's essentially what we're making. But we want this coloring book to have line weight, right? We also want to only do the line weight once. We don't want to do it every single time that we jump into another program. To be fair, like I've expressed before, Rhino can do line weights, but it's really hard to particularly see without actually changing to a paper view. But as you can see, we do have this button down here where you can actually set up paper layouts. You're more than welcome to try something like this. Again, I know some people have an absolute pain of Adobe Illustrator, and I can understand the frustration, especially on a laptop. But there are other ways. So definitely look into them if you're feeling a little bit more advanced. The next piece that we need is, of course, the top. I don't necessarily want to do every single piece today and absolutely bore you. It really is just about the same. But relatively speaking, that is the top. That doesn't necessarily have to cut through everything anymore. And we should be able to see everything slowly go away. However, another thing that is interesting is that we can do multiple clipping planes. So for instance, I can take this exact piece and copy it. And very often when we actually look at a clipping plane, by the way, or a floor plan, especially in architecture, what you're seeing is actually a section of it. Does that make sense, guys? So again, maybe some of that stuff starts to really pile up and you're like, dude, I can't even see the floor, right? Well, that's because even in architecture, we do that as well. That way, you don't necessarily see what is entirely all the way down. So just to kind of see what I mean, we'll put this one all the way up as if it was the top, and I'll leave this one essentially at the bottom or where that cutting plane was for the previous floor. Making some sense? Hopefully so. Because that definitely confuses a lot of students if they haven't taken Graphics 1 or Graphics 2. I'll go ahead and make 2D. Of course, up my top view. And you'll see that absolutely nothing happened. Well, that's not actually absolutely nothing. Just keep in mind that the section cut is cutting that away as well. I can't tell you how many students are like, sir, I can't see anything. Well, just delete one of those and of course you'll see the rest of the stuff that's back on the ground, right? Kind of do that stuff on purpose because I was once a student too and did the exact same things. I think I accidentally got some of my model. That's okay. I'm going to switch it to curves and points, so we should be okay there. Again, your filter is definitely your best friend when you're trying to get an exact view. But again, you'll notice that we don't have the topography on this one. We don't have all that stuff that's way below us, right? Especially by the time we get to the very top. And we have actually some other pieces that we don't need. So again, it gets all of the lines. We don't necessarily need all the lines. And I would say after you're done with this process, and I'll do this with the sections first before we go over this, you want to clean up the Make 2D, right? You don't want any extra lines. You don't want to have to go into Illustrator and be deleting lines. Do the work here in Rhino where it's easy and of course accurate. In our case, as you can imagine, we're just going to rotate for a section. So we'll take our clipping plane. Oh, doesn't want me to. Got to disable my filter, and that's fine. We'll take that one. We'll use Gumball, and we'll essentially rotate it 90 degrees. Once we've done that, yep, as you can imagine, we get a beautiful section. However, let's face it, something like this is not a beautiful section. It's just going to be all black, right? Because it's essentially cutting through some of those surfaces. I also think this is a really good way to just kind of visualize, honestly, what we do in architecture class. Some of us maybe even be taking G1 or G2 soon. You could refer to this video even to start to realize that, oh, that's actually the optimal section, right? Because it actually shows me cutting through the stairs. It shows what's happening behind, and it reveals that I need a threshold here. But regardless, what's kind of nice about this is I don't have to keep on drawing section after section after section. I could simply move the clipping plane in order to find possibly the best section to show. In my case, yes, I definitely want you to cut through the stairs, start to reveal the vertical circulation, and it makes a lot of sense. In my case, I'm going to take the entire thing, and you guessed it, Make 2D. However, I do need to find the optimal view, and keep in mind you want to make sure that you're not accidentally getting the other side, say the not clipping plane version, right? So you definitely want to be facing the clipping plane. In my case, it looks like it is. Let's double check, make sure the stairs are going the right way. Yep, definitely looks like it's being cut in the right position. And the topography is going down, and the topography is going down. Looks pretty good. So I'll switch to this view, make 2D, left view, maintain layers, and of course clipping plane intersections. I mean, obviously pretty important. If you want that intersection to come into play, of course make sure that you have it toggled. We'll press it. Usually the section takes a little bit longer. And again, we'll put it with the rest. In my case, we can't see it because it's been clipping planed out. You guys see that? Very confusing at times, which is why clipping plane does have some options, right? So if it's absolutely bothering you, you can also turn off the clipping plane in the top, right? And of course get all that back. So again, I can't express that enough because so many students get pretty confused about that alone. And let's, sorry, usually I let more space for the recording. There we go. Let's get some sections today, and that one particularly, I do want to take actually, again, show you how to do this all in one swoop. I don't see why you wouldn't want to. I mean, let's face it, we forget something, and we do need to eventually align this back, so we'll go over that as well. But relatively speaking, I typically put my section cut all the way to the bottom of the page, and as you can see at 1/4 scale, it's really going to cover up the entire piece. So something like that, and again, trimming and all of the dirty work, if you will, has to be done. In my case, I'm going to just stick to one section today and move on to setting up one of my favorite drawings before we get into basically setting this up for Illustrator and of course Photoshop. The next one, and you'll see is it actually in the preview, is an exploded axonometric. Now in this case it's an exploded isometric, which means basically this is at a 60 or 30 degree angle, and this is at a 60-degree angle, making that isometric view. In your case, I'm open to it. If you'd like to do our military projection that I showed you in Grasshopper on exercise 4 with the stairs, you're more than welcome to, and often makes a better looking drawing. However, for today, I do want to show it as an isometric view, just because, well, it follows the picture pretty well. So let's make that view also, and as you can imagine, we need to basically explode this. We no longer need the clipping plane, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it for now. Again, I can always bring it back, not a huge deal. You could put out as many as you want, actually. It's kind of confusing, especially if you accidentally lose one. So again, keeping track of those things. In my case, I want to set up for an exploded diagram, but I can't express this enough. It doesn't make sense to just explode the entire thing. I know some of us are pyromaniacs like myself, and we think that, oh, well, if I just explode everything about this project, that means it's good, right? Not necessarily the case, right? In fact, what you want an isometric exploded drawing to do is to reveal the hidden structure or reveal something else that you couldn't normally do with a physical model. For instance, I can't just take apart Esteban's model. It's going to destroy it. So this is a view in which can exist, right? But also could reveal the way and the inner workings of how this actually works. So for you, it may be just deorganizing, if you will, or organizing, I should say. I guess both of those words work in this situation. But in my case, I definitely don't want to mess this up. I might mess up this entire model. So again, when in doubt, make a copy. So I'll kind of make that over here and basically take the one that I know I want to keep true and put it maybe farther over there, or just hide it altogether. Sweet. So I do want to produce this view, and I do want to produce a certain view angle. So in my case, I might want to establish that angle first. I'll go to set view, isometric, and essentially pick one of these. I always kind of forget actually where I'm at. So in my case, I want to hide the rest of my exercises, and that is definitely the opposite of the view that I wanted. You don't actually have to highlight it. I just think it makes it easier to see. I think I chose northeast, so I'm going to choose southwest. Maybe get the opposite, and voila, we can maintain that view. However, from here, I essentially want to get rid of things that I don't need, such as that wireframe base that I created. I may just want to get rid of curves altogether. So I'll go to filter, disable, and set it to only curves and points. Yeah, I definitely want to get the points out of there too. So I'll select it all, And as you can imagine, I can delete the entire thing without necessarily deleting the physical parts of the model. Can't express that enough. Filter is a very useful tool. Before I even realized that there was a filter, I sat there like an idiot clicking every single one. So again, can't express that enough. Filter is a great tool. But another thing that's great is the organization that I may or may have not done for this tutorial. But essentially going to my layers and picking these off one at a time. Relatively speaking, we could probably leave the topography alone. You don't necessarily have to explode the topography layers unless you really started to dig at the model and maybe want to reveal something of that nature. In my case, I probably also want to leave the vertical structure, showing that, well, all of this maybe locks into place. I don't know about you, but there used to be these 90s puzzles where actually they were all simple layers, and you basically had to put it on these little vertical sticks, and it would make like the Sphinx or something, kind of this like three-dimensional flat model. But relatively speaking, we're kind of doing the opposite, kind of a reverse of that. Anyway, shows my age for sure. But in our case, I may want to slowly isolate some of the components of this model. Maybe this one, I definitely want to leave. So maybe locking some things. That way I don't accidentally move my topography. And start to get more familiar with what I'm showing. Now, in my case, the rails and the stairs, I probably want to show together. There's not really a whole lot different between those two. So perhaps I put that actually at the very top. So in my case, keep in mind you can also right-click a layer and select everything in that layer. So select objects, fantastic. I'm pretty sure you can also hold shift and select objects as well. So with that, we can get all the stairs and all the pieces. Now, since that's pretty grounded in here, I don't know, I think I might actually leave the stairs and take up some other pieces. So for instance, maybe I wanted to show that my piece had curvilinear elements. And again, I'm simply just going to use Gumball to basically move those pieces. In my case, maybe it's curvilinear elements. So this would have been good to probably put on its own layer. Luckily, there's not too many pieces. So we'll take this one, and we'll basically expression show that I basically have a curvilinear elements being taken out. Maybe I do the same for rectilinear elements, or orthogonal elements is also referred to as. And as you can see, I didn't really finish my project so much. But not everything has to go up either. In an exploded isometric, things can also go to the side. And that makes a lot of sense because, well, now I can see it a little bit better and it's sort of implied. And of course, I'll show you what I mean by how we can fix that up a little bit more. The next thing is maybe these grid systems, they're a little bit in the way. So I may want to show off my grid system or how it came about by, of course, eliminating. I definitely don't want to sit there and do all my grids. So hopefully I made that into a piece. Let's find out on today's episode. Oh, looks like I made it the same thing. It looks like I can isolate it though. Let's see. Get rid of the rest. Man, I was not organized. So we'll leave that one for sure. And we'll take off those for now. I did lock some of my components, so I should be okay. Let's see if we can get it. Dang, so close. I don't know what the heck that is. But we'll get rid of it for sure. In my case, this could also be a unique place where I can use the filter. So if I disabled it, change it from curves and points to surfaces, that would definitely work, right? However, it's also capturing my verticals, so I'll take those off as well. But pretty sweet, and I'll basically just move that off to the side. Again, I'd get it to a part to where it's not going to maybe get confusing with some of the other parts, and I may even want to lift some of those other pieces up. So for instance, I'll take these pieces just a little bit higher. And again, I don't necessarily want them to overlap or get confusing with this piece either. So I'll turn some of these things back on, such as that, and of course my vertical planes. Not too shabby. Pretty good exploded diagram. The last thing is I kind of moved my stuff around, so I'd want to put that back into place. Isometric, and of course southwest. Sweet. I'll take everything in this view, and as you can see, I didn't actually need to take that up a little bit more. I'd want to dial that in. To be fair, I could also do this in the Make 2D, but let's face it, it's just a little bit easier doing it that way. That's looking pretty good, so I'll go ahead and make 2D. And keep in mind, you don't have to be like super zoomed in. It's going to take the scale that it is. In my case, I definitely probably don't want hidden lines on this one. It's just a bit much. But I may want to save this view or this this rendering as well to possibly overlay or get some shade and shadow qualities. Sometimes looks pretty nice in an exploded isometrics. But we'll see. We'll go ahead and hit apply. And of course allow that drawing to produce. However, I do have my layers off, so I might not even see it at all. It looks like it's close to finishing. And we'll go ahead and turn on Make 2D again. And hopefully it should show up. Now, in my case, let's just go ahead and turn those all back on. Oh, except that one. Don't really need that one. Line weights, surfaces, and of course other pieces. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. So it's off to the side, basically based on that origin point, and that's looking pretty good. However, thank goodness it's grouped, but I do want to fit that on 11 by 17. And as you can see, I'm going to have to manipulate and change the scale. It also looks like it didn't grab the topography, which is fine for today, at least in tutorial, but obviously you'd want to grab that as well and fit it on the page nicely. Not too close to the edges, but pretty centered. And if you really wanted to find the center of the page, of course you could, by just simply making 2 diagonals and relatively getting the center of the page. In fact, the exact center, right? So not too bad. But before we go into Illustrator, before we go into Photoshop, we definitely want to change some things or add to this drawing, for instance, right? The first thing that I could do is actually show where things are getting cut. So for instance, very often what I like to do is explode everything. Explode and of course ungroup. And maybe even explode again. Obviously you should probably do ungroup before you explode, but I do it so many times it's absolutely unnecessary. But in my case, I do want to add poche. I want to show where those actually get cut, what they're actually cutting through versus not cutting through. So in our case, I may have to actually look at the model again or even the cutting plane again to understand my model. Don't be afraid to do so, especially since we have multiple copies of different models. So the first thing that I want to do is hatchet and basically set this up for Illustrator, right? That way I can get perfect line weights. In my case, I want to show everything that I'm cutting through and definitely going to be cutting through my vertical planes, or sorry, my vertical structure. Columns, my gosh, I couldn't remember that word worth my life. But I'd want to do the heavy lifting here, right? I don't want to necessarily do all that because it's as simple as a click in Rhino. I mean, seriously, work smarter, not harder. Arguably, since I have multiple copies of this, I could just do this once and even copy it to each one. But when you do actually apply this to the same hatch, what's kind of nice is it treats it as one object, which makes a lot of sense if I'm going to make it the same poche layer or the same color or the same line weight, so might as well do it all in one piece. Arguably, I could even do that across my drawings, as you'll see what I'm going to perform today. But relatively speaking, that's about all I'm cutting through, except for this last piece, right? I think I'm also cutting through this, but for the sake of drawing, I'm not going to show it pocheted. I guess I could, but it's going to get weird. I'll press enter and of course remain that as a solid. I could change the color here or even, oh, I would just leave it solid. Right, that way it translates to Illustrator a little bit better. I'll press apply and we're basically good to go, at least in terms of that section. Now what you would actually do here is a little bit different. It's much more of a graphic standards. I'd basically draw a line, and I would make basically what's known as a breaking line. So I'd get rid of some of these items that I don't need, and I'd basically start to make a break line. Now what that is, well, essentially it starts to indicate to our observer where we're cutting in the piece, and you've probably seen one before. It looks kind of like this. Basically a piece here and a piece there. You've probably seen it before though. I'll basically trim this out to show you what I mean. Hey, what's going on, Juan?
There's some topology drawings that came out of the printer last night, and I guess they left before they were printed. You don't know who they would be for or what.
Not
institute.
sure. I know it could be any of the D4 students.
Before though,
Yeah.
it would.
It would be these 4 labs.
Okay. All right. Well,
I'll let them know
are you
if
going to be
somebody's.
using the laser cutter today?
Probably not today.
I'm going to go ahead and pull them hard drives. And
Okay.
get them out of the machine.
Sweet, thank you, Juan.
All right.
Good deal. Progress is progress. So in our case, I do have some things in the way, and I may actually kind of fib it, especially in drawing. And this is kind of exactly what I mean, that you can still draw and fib things. We don't have to necessarily even model what we end up with. For instance, I could even fix some of these. I can get rid of other parts and actually tie some things together. So for instance, I could take this piece, extend, and basically fix a drawing. Ooh. Now, I don't want to necessarily waste any time for the tutorial today, but as you can see, that's actually much clearer. In fact, if we start to look at some of, I don't know, one of my favorite sites, just Pinterest, especially to generate ideas. Can't express that enough, but let's get a basic observation tower floor plan. And there was probably one on the page, quite literally. Let's take a look. It's exactly what I mean. Of course, those break lines indicating that we're actually going above ourselves. In fact, can't express this enough. This is exactly what we're doing, right? So if you need an example, as you can see, it's pretty nice and easy to find one, right? Such as just typing observation tower floor plan. And there's actually a plethora of different uses and different ways that we can actually show those graphically. So again, if you haven't taken Graphics 1 or Graphics 2, it's not an excuse. I mean, I'll understand, but again, use your resources wisely. And we have the most incredible resource there is. Another tool that we can use is called Match Properties. So if you hit Match Properties, you can actually match something existing, enter, and actually change other items. So that is pretty nice. Now, I did it accidentally the opposite way, so I'd want to take that one and, of course, change it to that. Match Properties, fantastic, because I don't necessarily have to select something, right-click on the layer, change object layer all the time. It could just be a match copy, right, or match properties. And as you can see, it even asks you, like, which properties do you want, which is actually a nice fix. In our case, I need to finish some other tied in, so I'd extend also those. So again, can't express it enough that the drawing isn't complete just because we make 2D. The drawing is complete when it actually meets some sort of graphic standards. This is also where I can add some lines, such as like up arrows, right? So I could literally draw those by hand. You really shouldn't, because it's gonna look a little inaccurate. But let's face it, I mean, I could mirror. I used to all the time, just for the sake of speed. Right? And then, oh my gosh, I just take the exact same one and group it, copy, and basically use that wherever I needed it. Does that make sense, guys? Seriously, work smarter, not harder. But in our case, as you can see, I'm not going to do that. We need to do this, and that's why we have 2.5 weeks for this part of the project. However, let's continue. Let's assume that one's finished. Let's assume I did the same thing, some poché, some hatching, all those kinds of things. The one where it really starts to count is, of course, in the section. As you can see, it's pretty confusing. You'll have to probably look at this clipping plane model and go, okay, what was being cut through? Because it can start to be like, is this being cut through? Wait, is the stairs being cut through? And very often, even when you try to, say, hatch something, especially even in a boundary mode, some things might not be completely closed. I mean, they might, but you might be like, wait a minute, dang it, I need that to actually get cut too. So you may need to actually draw something first before you actually end up cutting. Another thing is all these are getting cut through. Yep, that's right. I'll have to basically hatch those. But again, I'd want to do that work here before I ever got into Illustrator or this next part. So from here, I've basically set up my drawings. I've made 2D and I've made it essentially perfect. Maybe I even had to fix some line weights, maybe I even had to start to organize, and for the sake of tutorial, we'll consider this organized, right? Now, once I was actually finished, I'd probably want to set these at least close together. I mean, as you can see, they're pretty arbitrary, but they represent an 11 by 17. I'll definitely want to keep that for this next part, but depending on how OCD you are, like myself, you might actually want this to be pretty congruent, right? So actually getting these relatively close, and you'll see what I mean by the next part. So we can take that piece, we can line it up with certain elements fairly easily, especially with smart tools on. But again, for the sake of tutorial, we'll fake it till we make it today. From here, just like any other exported project, we're going to highlight the whole thing in the top view and export selected. We'll go ahead and turn that into an AI file or a DWG. My computer specifically likes DWGs, so I'll go with a DWG today, and we'll call it test computer graphics exercise 6. We'll go ahead and save it on the desktop for today and export. In my case, CAM Imperial is the way to go, and I'll go ahead and export. Again, some of you guys are just doing an AI file, and that's totally fine as well. We'll go ahead and go to Illustrator. And honestly, just do the line work. Like I said, we're basically making a coloring book for Photoshop. So, well, we can't actually change that in Photoshop. So we need to do this first in Illustrator. As you guys know, we do this all the time. You shouldn't spend, honestly, 30 minutes or more. And in fact, if you realize you forgot some lines, go back to Rhino, draw it, organize it, and then, again, put it back in Illustrator so you can change the line weight quickly. In our case, I'll go to Desktop, Test Lines. Illustrator could not open the file. It needs to be repaired. Dang, I've never had that happen. Let's try it again. In my case, I'm going to actually explode everything, just in case that was an issue. I'm going to explode. And, well, actually, let's try the AI file. You never know. Expecting different results by doing the same thing is, in fact, crazy. So let's go ahead and do Adobe Illustrator. We'll call it the same thing. Export. In my case, I want a snapshot of the current view because I already have my own scaling going on. However, keep in mind you could scale the entire drawing where 1 foot equals 1/8 of an inch, or in my case, now it's a quarter. So 0.25. Honestly, either one of these is perfectly fine. However, since I'm going to have 5 artboards, I might just make it a little easier on myself. So now that it's exported, let's try again. A little bit better. So as you can see, came in, has all the layers. Let's double check. Sweet. So you definitely want to double check those things before you just naturally get started. In my case, I want to get my rulers out, so Command R, and basically set up my artboard. I know I've done this before, but maybe not for 6 pages. So in my case, I'm going to document setup, edit artboards, and as you can imagine, we're just going to manipulate this thing. So I just need 1, and I need these to be essentially 11 by 17. So I definitely want those first, and we'll go with 11 by a height of 17. And what's also pretty nice is you can copy this multiple times. So if you take that piece, hold Option, it will accidentally probably make a copy of your piece, so maybe let's not do it that way. Let's do it one at a time. We'll take that and basically just move this on the board so it doesn't get so confused. File, document setup, edit artboards, and as you can imagine, we can need a couple of these, 6 of them. For the most part, you can usually line that up. I typically just kind of fake it till I make it. Sweet. But I'm a little perfectionist and a little bit of OCD as well. But we need 5 for today. So again, just get them on the board first. Then I click on them and of course dial them in. 11 by 17, sweet. 11 by 17, sweet. And 11 by 17. Sorry, this is known as also the tedious tutorial. As you can see, I really have to go through each step. But probably probably good for some that are especially not here today. So it's a long one. That's why I got started a little bit earlier. But what it demonstrates is actually the workflow that we go through essentially with every project. And I know it sounds like a lot, but really we're using the programs for their best abilities and that we can move a little bit faster, right? So that's looking pretty good. And as you can imagine, now we need to line up each of these drawings to each piece, which could be like pulling teeth, especially at this scale. So I'm gonna make them a little bit bigger. I'm gonna hold shift to maintain that geometry. I'm gonna hold the shift bar and basically move that around. Take a piece and line it up accordingly. Now in my case, I'll align it up to that rectangle and it should be absolutely perfect. Boom. Pretty close. And that could just be my alignment. Perfect. That way we can actually get the perfect scale. But again, yes, I need to do a little bit of the legwork. Nice. We'll save this one for the very bottom. And as you can see, it's trying to line up to just about every single piece. But what's nice about doing it this way, guys, is I finish every drawing at once, right? At least in terms of line weight, there starts to be a consistency between my drawings. And, well, I'm already done as soon as I'm done with the file, right? So again, some of us prefer to do this, especially if you don't have a very strong computer, to do one drawing at a time. And that's definitely acceptable, nothing wrong with that. But as you can see, it's a game changer in terms of being able to do this. However, the school computers will have absolutely no issues. So there is that too. Ooh, forgot to get the rectangle. There we go. And we'll fake it till we make it look. There goes that trim that I forgot. I don't necessarily need to do it here because it's not actually going to show up on the paper. But relatively speaking, what's kind of nice is now I have all my drawings ready to go. And I can essentially change the layers all in one spot. So again, I'm going to turn them all off real quick and turn them on one at a time. So as you can see, that way I make sure that I get everything. Or realize that there's some pieces that I just don't need. Oh, I do need that piece, so let's take it all. Again, we'll change these real quick for the sake of tutorial. Obviously, you don't need to copy these my methods right here. Obviously, I'm just trying to go pretty quickly so that this isn't a 2-hour video. But essentially changing the colors, which arguably, yes, could be done in Rhino, but again, I think this program does it way quicker and much more intuitively. But essentially, I want to change the line weight. I'd want to dial that in here. I could add scale figures if I wanted to as well, and I have a wonderful place to get some of those. But again, what's really nice is I'm completing 3 drawings now at once, right? I'm not having to do and then having to remember what line weights I chose, you know, or have even 5 separate open files that would really also bog down my computer. Because I did technically used to do it that way, right? I do one drawing at a time. But again, as you can see, we do have to go through each layer and change line weights. Some typography, ooh, nice. We'll get that one dashed just for, you know, shits and giggles. Give it some dash weight, and you could still get rid of lines, but it's really hard to add lines, I think, to Illustrator in an accurate way. Don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful illustration program for graphic design. But in our case, when we're doing technical drawings, shoot, you don't want to like move one line, dude, let alone, you know, the entire piece. So let's keep going. Of course, you could totally skip this part in the video because it is tedious and it looks way cooler when it's time-lapsed anyway. But just in case you miss it or miss what I'm clicking on, you're more than welcome to slow it down and find out. I didn't also realize how many people watch these videos outside of San Antonio College. Like, I get questions all the time, like, and thank yous for explaining Rhino and architecture. It's kind of cool, not gonna lie. So this one's for you guys too. But as you can see, way quicker than selecting one line at a time, and arguably pretty nice in terms of finding line weights. But let's say I was done. As you can see, we got some line weights going. It's starting to look actually pretty decent in terms of a line drawing. All right, really starting to get somewhere. Now, obviously, I'm missing poche and all kinds of stuff. And in fact, it looks like I'm missing poche in these as well. Oh, there it is. But it looks like something happened here. Perhaps I didn't. Oh, did it do a different one? Not sure what's going on there. Obviously, I could still fine-tune this, but let's face it, I can't trim that very easily. Arguably, not as easy as the other. So one thing that I could do is take the piece itself and switch it. Not a big deal. Obviously, one controls the fill, one controls the layer itself. So I could take that, quite literally flip them, and get the exact same effect. Now, if you've taken Graphics 1, you definitely know that typically you want your edge to be a little bit darker, a little bit bolder, whereas the poche, you definitely want that to be slightly lighter. This is actually a pretty good situation besides these weird little lines in there, so I'll get rid of those. But as you can see, we can still change things, right? And we can still effectively get somewhere. But arguably, a little bit more time. So let's say we were done. Now here's the really fun part. Let's say, you know, we got the line weight done, we removed the lines that we don't need because we realized that that is way harder to delete lines, definitely in Photoshop. We actually have to sit there and erase them, so be very careful. The next part of the workflow, let's say we're done and we want to go and make our coloring book. We'll go to Photoshop and we'll basically set up these files. Now this one, you probably do want to do one at a time, right? To be fair, we're only going to do so much to the floor plan and we're only going to do so much to the section, and arguably you don't really have to do much to the axonometric. That could be actually just a render in the background, but we definitely don't want to use a render for the floor plan or section because it's going to give us a false shadow, right? That section cut, it's going to show us shadows that don't actually exist when they get cut, and normally we don't show shadow in a section view or plan view, so do keep that in mind. Sometimes we show shadow in a site plan, but we don't necessarily have a site plan for this project. So in our case, I do want to start a new file. I want to make it an 11 by 17, so I'll switch it to inches, and I'll go with, oh my god, 2000 inches. Dang, that's nuts. 11 by 17. So of course I want to maintain the paper size. I'd probably stick to a 350 resolution or 400 if I just wanted to be that cool, but we'll start with 350 for today. And obviously I want to do this potentially one at a time. Good thing I kind of already did it all here. So for today, at least in section, this is basically how you do it. Excuse me. I'd select the piece that I want. I'd literally, especially with a double screen, I just put Photoshop on one screen and one screen on the other. And since they are both Adobe programs, we'll essentially take this piece and quite literally drag it on. Voila. Since it was 11 by 17 in Adobe Illustrator, it's now an 11 by 17 in Photoshop. And as you can see, it maintains the line weights. Wonderful. However, once I press enter, it's stuck. And as you can see, comes in actually as an individual smart layer. And that's pretty sweet, not gonna lie. It took me a long time to realize that I could even do that. But it's a game changer because, man, I wish I could just drag stuff from Rhino into Adobe. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, without all the exporting. But as you can see, if I zoom in, it is no longer a vector line. It turned into a raster line because of the Photoshop program. Just to kind of express that, if we zoom into our Illustrator file, it's always going to be more crisp. Why? Because it's a vector program. Right? It's actually re-rendering that every time that I zoom in, whereas in Photoshop it's actually a crisp line at that 350 dpi. So again, if you want that to be a little bit more crisp, what do? up the DPI to 400, 450, and it's really going to get a crisp line. However, if you notice that it's extremely blurry, it may be an indicator that either your paper is too small or your DPI is off. So can't express that enough. However, to end the tutorial today, or at least give us a good starting point for next time as we approach 9:40. I'm sorry I'm making this one so long. But as you can see, just to recap, we produced our drawings, all of them. We got them into Illustrator with ease. We changed their line weights, and we essentially dragged it right into Photoshop all in a single hour. Now, seriously, if I wasn't talking, we could have done that in 30 minutes, right? Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of getting the poche, make 2D, get the breaking lines, get the up arrows, get the graphic scales, get the everything, right? You want to do that in Rhino, right? That way it's as simple as changing and adding context. So what I would say for Photoshop is we're definitely adding context. So in our case, maybe I actually want to make the ground look a little bit more realistic. Okay, well, for today, we'll make it green, for goodness sakes. So in my case, yeah, I could get the brush tool or the letter B, and you'll notice that it works a lot like other programs, but in our case, I may want to actually make a new layer and call it grass. We'll touch grass today. So in our case, I like to move that a little bit up. I don't really need to see that color so much, and there's a couple of ways to do this. Now, I know I've probably expressed this to a lot of my classes, especially if you're in D1, but this is kind of for everybody. So again, maybe a review for some, but definitely the beginnings for many. So in my case, I'd want to, I don't know, get the grass first, and there's a couple ways I could do that. I could just select this one piece at a time. So you'll see that I have a selection tool here, and quite literally just use the lines as a section, and basically hold shift over and over again, and basically add to that selection. See what I mean? However, that's going to take a year and a half, but arguably in some cases actually kind of useful, right? I mean, especially if you have a very orthogonal model and you don't really have a whole lot to show. To be fair, that's pretty intuitive, but not exactly accurate. As you can see, it doesn't really get up to the line. Nah, it's not that great. The next tool that we could use, and to deselect that, we can do Command D as in Delta, and we can deselect something. In our case, my favorite tool is actually right-clicking on the lasso and going to a polygonal lasso tool. Can't express that enough because, well, in architecture we use a lot of straight lines. So what's great about the polygonal lasso tool is I can hold shift and quite literally just draw on the line itself. After all, I want the grass to essentially go underneath these lines. So what better way to hide the grass than to basically just simply trace it. Now, what does stink is that you do essentially have to trace this. And as you can see, even on curvilinear elements, it could take some time. And again, I'm running out of time for this tutorial, so I'm not necessarily going to make it perfect today. Obviously, you'd want to trace this perfectly and essentially go around the entire model. Now, in my case, I'm going to go fly through it as fast as possible. Basically just holding shift and completing that selection. Now, I've gotten everything, but as you can notice, I do have some other areas in between. That might be easier to get with a magic wand tool. Now, what's really great is while I have that selected, if I hold shift, I can add to that selection as well. However, it's based on the layer piece itself. So I'd actually have to switch to my lines, and you'll notice that it's going to start to get some of these pieces. Hopefully. As long as my tolerance is not 64, holy crap. Go back to 32. Usually it's at 32 by default. In my case, it looks like it still has my selection. Sweet. So I want to get the other grassy knolls. So we'll get those pieces, switch to my tool, and essentially get some of those pieces. However, if it's not working for you, that's okay. Again, you can use your selection tool or lasso tool, but as long as you're holding shift, it'll basically add to that selection. Oh, I get it. In my case, I've already got that selected. So what I need to do is actually select the inverse. So I'll right click and select the opposite of what I selected. That, excuse me, that will definitely make it easier. and why my magic wand tool was not working. So again, I'll hold shift to add to my selection. You'll see it actually produce like this little plus sign, right, indicating that it's adding to the selection. And as you can see, we can get the rest of the grassy knoll. Oh, but it got a lot more. Again, I can edit undo and set that tolerance to something a little bit less. Keep in mind that the tolerance number is based on the amount of pixels that you're selecting. The higher the number, the more pixels it selects. The lower the number, the less pixels it selects. So in my case, yeah, just needed a lower tolerance and I can get the rest of the grass. But that's looking pretty sweet, at least for today. A couple of ways that I can brush this in is simply a brush tool. So the letter B for brush and switching to that grass layer. In my case, I don't want red grass today, so I'm gonna go with kind of a slight yellow. And again, I don't wanna like realistically make grass, right? But one of the things that I can do is, and you'll notice I've actually added some tools to these computers, and I basically made some architecture brushes, especially for these Waccoms. You can quite literally draw it in, which I'll show next time. But in our case, let's just brush it in as like a big pencil. I mean, why not? In my case, I'd basically draw that in. Now, as you can see, I should probably use something a little bit faster for today. So I'll go with just like a general brush. And I'll basically make that so large and give it 0 hardness, because I kind of want that to be slightly in there. Now, as you can see, it's really saturated. So one thing that I could do also is change its opacity to something a little bit lighter, like a marker. But just like Toy Story 4, we want a little bit of anomalies, right? But maybe not that much anomaly. So one thing that you can do in Photoshop is if you do it all in one swoop, it won't do an overlap to you. And voila, we got grass, right? To be fair, we could add a little bit of spices to the mix. I very often try to make a kind of a highlight spot. So I'll change some of the colors in a dark spot, right? So slightly darker in some areas. And I'll basically just brush that in. Oop. And again, I can't mess up. I could basically add that in. But as you can see, the brush tool is at least somewhat forgiving. Now, once I have that layer, I could even further change that layer, right? So if it was just in case too much, right, I could really pull it back and let the architecture be enhanced. Now, obviously for today, as you can imagine, you could already get started with just that tool alone, being able to select something and brush into individual layers. However, for today, I am going to end it here. That way, when we start on part 2, we'll immediately start talking about Photoshop and, of course, a plethora of tools that we can use in order to add context. However, for at least this part 1 of exercise 6, it was definitely about the workflow, going from Rhino to Illustrator and ending with Photoshop, right? And as you can imagine, from Photoshop, that's where we just want to print and, of course, pen up, right? Just like any other studio. However, if you have these tools at your disposal, you will run so much quicker in Studio, and that means more time to think and design, or just more time in general. And let's face it, money is time. So, any questions about the workflow, guys? Hopefully some light bulbs going off. I know it's only 4 of us today, so again, I appreciate you guys being here. But if there's no questions, I'll end it there for today. All right.